Welcome or welcome back to Silver Pride, an online festival with purpose to connect and celebrate older LGBT folks and to promote intergenerational communication between old timers and young whippersnappers. I'm not sure where me and Matthew Todd fit in, possibly somewhere in between, but I'm going to introduce Matthew, who is a journalist and a leading commentator on LGBT issues. He was the editor of Attitude magazine for a long time and then left. He got Prince William on the cover, as well as many other achievements, and then left when he published his seminal book, Straight Jacket, delving into gay shame and giving you insights into that, a kind of self-help book. So that's Matthew Todd.
I'm the whippersnapper, by the way. I mean, it's come to something where you have to tell everybody, doesn't it? Thank you, and I'm with the lovely Matt Cain, who'll be posing in evening wear, swimwear, talking about how he wants to save the world. Matt Cain, who you will all know, I'm sure, a former culture editor, wasn't it, on Channel 4 News? Yeah, that's how I first came to know your cute little face. And then became the editor of Attitude magazine. You took over from me when I left, didn't you?
I was quite pleased. There was about a 6-month gap. And I was quite pleased with that because it meant that I didn't have to fill your shoes. And
this was all rubbish. Changing it all from top to bottom. And then also claimed author whose two big hit books are The Madonna of Bolton, which is very, very exciting, a great book. And also his new book, which has just come out, which has been in the top 1,000 of the Amazon charts, which as an author, I know that's a really huge, big deal, and it's getting rave reviews, and I'm so pleased, which is The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle, which we will talk about, which is about being older, which is something that isn't really touched upon much in gay culture. But carry on saying nice things about me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot in the past, certainly a lot of gay media, and definitely now with the online stuff, activity, it tends to focus on younger and hotter. And actually, primarily before both of our time, Attitude used to come under fire for having hot young men on the cover all the time.
That was my time.
Oh, was it? Well, I know we both tried hard to move away from that, but I actually think I think the general picture has possibly got worse since then because of social media and the clickbait revolution, and it's all about young and hot, isn't it, for gay men? Do you think?
Well, we've dived straight into the top. We're literally there'll be people like punching the screen. Well, it's really complicated, isn't it? It's really intense. I mean, I was actually talking to a friend of mine who used to work at Attitude years ago in the heyday, in the late 90s, who now lives in Los Angeles. And, you know, he's around my age, late 40s. And he feels very disconnected from the gay community, the LGBT community. And I think it's really interesting. And we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. You know, when I remember when Attitude started, it was 1990. I mean, we're talking about Attitude straight away. Not that Attitude is the epicenter of everything, but it was 1994. I was at university. Attitude began. We could just come out of this period of kind of, you know, the worst times of HIV and AIDS, where HIV and AIDS had emerged and exploded with all the kind of homophobia in the press that came with it. Was absolutely bleak. The kind of message that I know you've spoken about this because we're around the same age, you know, was just that, you know, if you were gay, it meant that you were probably a paedophile, and you know, you would definitely catch HIV, you would die of AIDS, you had no future.
You were spreading disease, you couldn't be trusted, everybody had to be careful around you, you were a sexual predator.
Yeah, it was absolutely horrific, wasn't it? So, and then I remember then, so obviously we had Section 28 in 1988, and then Stonewall started in 1989, then Outrage began in 1990. It was kind of like the fight back, really. And I think part of that, Attitude came along in 1994, and as a young person, I was 20 or 21 when that began. This idea that, you know, it wasn't so political, and it was all about fashion and celebrity, and it was meant to be like a gay version of The Face. And as a young person, there's nothing wrong with wanting that, or, you know, wanting to read a magazine like that. And I was really excited about it, and I loved it. Obviously, then I came, and I was at Attitude over 20 years. I left, and I came back a few times, and eventually became editor in 2008. And I think as a young person, I really liked seeing all of those kind of sexy boys. And also, I think we were in a different time as well, where I remember when Attitude began. I didn't join until '96, so it was 2 years after it began. But I remember at that time, you couldn't get big celebrities to appear on the cover. I mean, well, George was the very first cover. Then they had Peter Kuna from Dream. Things Can Only Get Better. That was a big hit at the time. And a lot of those covers in the first year or two were kind of made up. Like they were kind of, you couldn't get a photo shoot with big celebrities. So you'd have, I don't know, Diana Ross or whoever it was. And they'd create a kind of illustration to put on the cover. And then they'd buy in an interview, which isn't great, really, from some other magazine that was done 2 years ago. And it was only in '96, I think, when Robbie Williams gave Attitude the first big interview after he left Take That. And I think that became a big signal to the rest of the kind of media landscape and to celebrities that you could do a magazine like Attitude and it wasn't a bad thing. So I think that was a great time to be. It was kind of empowering to have celebrities and young people and Anton Deck and people like that who did, and people in soaps. At that time, we hadn't had that before. So it was kind of, for me, and I'm sure it was the same for you, it was a kind of amazing thing just to see celebrities saying, actually, I don't hate gay people. I like gay people. I'm a straight man. I don't mind gay people finding me attractive. Because at that time, you hadn't had that at all. It was like everybody hates you, basically, if you were gay. That was what the narrative and culture was. So I think in that way, it was great. I think maybe you ended up having a bit too much of a good thing. You're gagging to say something, though, aren't you?
No, I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I absolutely loved it in the 90s. And by the time I came along to edit it in 2016, actually, celebrities were queuing up to appear on the cover, not just straight ones, but there were plenty of gay ones too. But what I was going to say was actually talking about the 80s and how awful it was. I think by the time Attitude came along, I certainly picked up on a general feeling in the community that certainly the older gays had been through such a horrendous trauma. And those of us we lived through the kind of reverberations of it, in terms of, as you say, what people thought about queer people. I think they'd gone through such a trauma that they didn't want to talk about it for a while. They just wanted to embrace the fun. And I
think we needed a break, didn't we? As a community, we just needed a little bit of just like a light to actually kind of, instead of being told constantly we were these terrible, terrible, awful people, we just needed a break and to just try and have a kind of a little bit of a kind of a celebratory aspect to our existences for a while.
Funnily enough, my boyfriend is Jewish, and he lost a lot of family members in the Holocaust, and speaking to Jewish people about what happened then, as far as I can make out, all the films and books that we take for granted now dealing with the Holocaust, I think there was a period when they didn't talk about it before they started to talk about it and heal as a community. And I wonder whether there's a parallel there, and there's probably others that we could pluck out of history if we had a better historical general knowledge.
But so going back to kind of like the idea that there's two, the youth culture is kind of everywhere and dominates and is a problem. I mean, I certainly remember that. So Attitude started in 1994. Boys Magazine started in 1994. Loaded started in 1994. So it was all a wave of the same thing. To me, seeing those kind of free gay magazines really was not always the best thing in terms of my own mental health, because it was just bombarded with, it's the thing that gay culture does, and it still does it now all over the world. If you go to any country and you find the gay bar, there's pictures of men's bodies, aren't there? Big muscles. It's always, I remember going past a bar in London actually a few years ago, maybe about 10 years ago now, and they were advertising their Christmas dinner. They were having a Christmas dinner like in the run up to Christmas, and they had these two kind of like, I hate to say they use the word bimbo guys, but this idea, these two kind of guys literally just all coiffured and like, hair gel, with just in these little pants with a tinsel around their necks, eating a Christmas dinner, as if that was what the gay experience was, that you'd have to be in your pants with tinsel and big muscles to even have a Christmas lunch. So I think that culture was pervasive, wasn't it?
It never ceases to amaze me on social media now, the people who have big currency on Instagram, they'll post things and the caption is about something quite serious, and they'll basically be half naked, like top off, for absolutely no reason. It's not about fitness or anything. And I agree. I think for a lot of people, it could be quite alienating seeing those images and thinking that's what being gay meant. But actually, by the time I was at Attitude, and I was lucky enough to be there in 2017 in the anniversary year, 50th anniversary of the start of decriminalisation in England and Wales, and we interviewed a lot of older gay men, both celebrities for a podcast that we did, but also just everyday gay men for the magazine. And their stories were fascinating, the kind of things they'd been through, and people, readers, really engaged with them. And I agree with what you've said about we needed that kind of attitude in the 90s. I think now that stage has gone before it, we're ready for yeah, we're ready for, yeah, that's partly why I've written this book about an older gay character and flashbacks to 50 years ago and what things used to be like now and how it is now, and what it used to be like then and how it is now. Because that year at Attitude, speaking to all those older gay men and seeing reader responses to them slightly kind of was part of the inspiration for me writing this book.
That's really interesting. I mean, like, it's funny as well. I mean, this is not just what we're talking about, but I used to very early on in my editorship, I remember going to do an event in Manchester Pride, and someone said to me, "Oh, you promote body fascism. You'd never put Stephen Fry on the cover." And so we came back, we did put Stephen Fry on the cover, and it was the worst selling issue certainly for many years, certainly since I'd been there. And that's no offense to Stephen Fry, because Stephen Fry's got millions of Twitter followers. I think what it said was something about what people come to gay magazines for. I remember one guy calling me, a friend of mine I was talking to on the phone once when I was at work, and he said, "Oh, I've got your copy of Attitude here with Ben Cohen, the rugby player, on the cover. Why have you put Ben Cohen, the straight guy with his shirt off, on the cover?" And then he said, "Well, I suppose that's the reason I bought it." And that was the truth. So I'd be very frustrated by the fact that we all like sexy, older, whether we're older, younger, whatever, we all like to look at nice, sexy pictures and hot people on the covers of the magazine. Who doesn't? People do, men, women, whatever, gay, straight. It's just
it's not just a gay thing. It's not just a gay thing.
It's not just a gay thing. Yeah, and I tried to, I put Beth Ditto on the cover, and tried to put all these diverse people on the cover, and every time I did it, the sales would go down. So it was this constant battle with the owner saying, "Well, I want to do things which mean more, but we know that they don't sell as well. So you have to constantly play this game of like doing the more substantial stuff and then having a sexy pop star off to make it sell." But that being said, now I think it's got this whole momentum of its own. I mean, even when I was researching Straight Jacket, there's a chapter of Straight Jacket about the 80s. I remember going through all old issues of Gay Times, and even then, in the Pink or whatever, I think it was called Capital Gay before, the newspaper before. Even then, long before Attitude existed, it was always features about sexy bodies and muscles. We've always had a very specific, gay men in particular, bi men have had a very specific relationship with working out bodies. I mean, it's quite a harsh landscape out there, isn't it?
Well, can I just say, actually, if you listen to the way straight men talk about women, I mean, there's a standard thing: are you a boob man or a leg man or a bum man? Do you prefer blondes or brunettes? I mean, we as a community are often very self-aware and self-critical, and we beat ourselves up about the way we are with things like body image, and quite rightly so. We should have these conversations. But straight men often don't, And actually, one thing I was going to say to you was, when you were talking about how things are now, do you think now that hot bodies are 10 a penny on Instagram, and also nicely shot and lit and filtered, do you think that the currency has kind of plummeted, and actually I think people are more ready to engage in older stories? They want content and intelligence. They want to know about gay history and experiences. They want emotional depth, actually.
We're talking about the same group of people here. Who are these people? Well, where are you? I met 5 of them over the last 10. No, I'm sure there are lots of people. I'm sure there are lots of people like that. I hope there are, and I'm sure that's probably why some people are engaging with your book as well, because of that history. And actually, I do think it's true. When I've gone around doing talks for my books, and my second book is free plug. This one, Pride, the story of the LGBTQ equality movement, with lots of nice, pretty pictures about the history. So when I've gone around talking about that, I think there is quite a lot of people who actually who are interested in that, who want to engage with that. That's true for sure. And I think there's a kind of element of people wanting to understand who were the people that kind of paved the way for us, who were the people that created these things. And I think what was really fascinating about It's a Sin was to see all these young people who had no idea about how bad, the whole experience of HIV and AIDS in the 80s were. But that being said, I think it's understandable if there are people. I mean, I can be one of them. I can find it really depressing when you look on Instagram. So obviously with Instagram, there's algorithms. So if you start liking pictures of cats, you suddenly get bombarded with lots of different accounts about cats, whatever it may be. So if you start liking gay things, you suddenly start getting bombarded with people in their pants. And like you say, I mean, the amount of people I know, I mean, am I being jealous? Yes, I put my hands up. I wish I could say, oh, I've got lots of maths homework to do today for work, and post a picture of me, with my breasts out and my little tiny pants. That's what people do. Oh, I noticed the terrible news today. Here's my body. It is kind of over. You do think, oh, for God's sake. I actually do. I mute and unfollow lots of gay accounts because I don't want to be constantly bombarded with this feeling that to be a gay man, you have to have this amazing body. Your currency as a human being, if you're a gay man, is sex and your body, because it's just like there's.
You know what? Actually, I completely agree with you, and I absolutely want to ask you about both of your books. I wonder whether part of the reason people are engaging with mine is because it goes against all that. Because it's about gay history, because it's about an older gay man, there's no reference to hot bodies. Basically, it's about, I'm going to do a quick plug for mine.
It's about humans, isn't it? And emotions and experience.
Yeah. So actually, the inspiration for me writing it, The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle, was partly those interviews with older gay men when I was at Attitude. And as exactly as you say about It's a Sin, people, I mean, obviously I've started writing it way before It's a Sin was out, but people saying, I have no idea any of that happened, and wanting to shed a light on queer history. And I would argue that every gay over a certain age, however ordinary his life, has an extraordinary story because of what he's lived through, whether it's persecution, criminalization, imprisonment, blackmail, being fired from a job, kicked out of home, chemical castration, conversion therapy, electric shock therapy, all of those things. And I wanted to write a story. So it's about a postman in his 60s who is lonely and unhappy and in the closet, and he wants to change things. He wants to be happy. He realizes the only way to do it is to set off in search of the lost love of his life, a man he hasn't seen for 50 years. And what happens is as he's searching for him and gradually finding himself and transforming along the way, you get these flashbacks that show what happened with him and this boyfriend and why they were so cruelly torn apart and what the world was like then and how it treated us. And I really wanted to kind of, expose that and get it out there, but also celebrate how much better things are now and just how far we've come. And I wonder whether the reason people are connecting with the book is partly because they want to hear these stories now. They didn't want to hear them for so long. I mean, if they'd done It's a Sin 10 years ago, would 18 million people have watched it?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I think your book is really radical in that way. I mean, in some ways, it reminds me of a little bit of Beautiful Thing, in the sense that when Beautiful Thing came along, the idea of, everything before had been very arty, and Derek Jarman and like people lying on rocks and Sebastian and all like really, I mean, Derek worshipped the ground Derek Jarman walks on, all really important art stuff. But I think for me, 1996, ironically, the year I started at Attitude, when Beautiful Thing became a film, it was such a big hit because we'd never just seen two ordinary boys, working class boys, having a relationship. It was just so out of the ordinary. And I think it's similar to your book, to hear the story of an older gay man. And I mean, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, older gay men are kind of really erased from LGBT culture. It's terrible, really. And what I don't like as well, I have to say, what irritates me is that whole thing when sometimes when older men are talked about in culture, it's like, oh, a daddy. It's sexualized. It's always sexualized, and like it's fine, please, so someone would sexualize me, that would be fantastic. So I'm sure that's great in some ways, but again, there's so much more to who, to everybody, to men, women, older, gay, straight, whatever, whoever we are. There's more to us than just our sexual appeal or sexual currency or whatever. So yeah, I think your book's great, and I think that's an amazing thing to just have that narrative out there. Good for you, Ducky.
Right, let's talk about yours now.
Oh,
Can I just say, what I really want to ask you about Straight Jacket,
mhm.
which you need to tell us about and give us a little summary. But when we were talking about what gay men wanted to see, the images they wanted to see, the stories they wanted to read, the version of their self they wanted to absorb and experience, when you first unleashed Straight Jacket into the world about gay shame and some of the self-destructive behavior and patterns of behavior it drives us towards, were there gay men who didn't want to hear what you were saying?
Here it is, the Yellow Gay Book. Well, it's funny you should say that, because when I became editor of Attitude in 2008, and at the same time, my play Blowing Whistles was on in the West End. All these great things were happening, but I wasn't feeling great about myself, and I was really struggling. Friends were struggling. I think it was 2009, 2010. We started losing people. Alexander McQueen, my friend Christian Digby, TV presenter, died. It was just a horrible, horrible time. And I thought, and at the same time, I was going into recovery and finally getting some answers after years of seeing therapists. Why do I feel so bad? Why do I feel depressed? Why do I have such low self-esteem despite all these great things happening in my life? Finally found a gay therapist who said, well, of course you're screwed up, you're gay. And then went on to explain that it's not that you're gay itself, it's the fact that you've grown up in a society that invalidates LGBT people at every turn. And so I thought, okay, that's a really revolutionary thing for me, and I need to write about that in Attitude. There were people at Attitude, a couple of people who were a bit nervous about us saying it, because gayness itself had been kind of listed and thought of as a mental illness for decades and decades and decades in itself. So to acknowledge that we do have higher levels of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, suicide ideation, self-harm, body image issues, all the rest of it, felt like a really scary possible thing. And were you giving a gift to homophobes? So I had some people a bit worried about that, but then we published it in 2010, got the biggest post-bag Attitude had ever had. Everyone's saying, oh my God, we need to talk about this more. So then when I got my book deal and was writing about it, I had quite a lot, well, I had a handful of people saying to me, oh my God, you can't write a book about this, you can't say this. At the same time, I was becoming aware of the chemsex problem of some gay men using crystal meth and G, and lots of people dying from overdoses. It's a really, really big problem. And people saying, you can't talk about that, that will give us a bad name. It's just a few people. I mean, someone from the Terence Higgins Trust said it's just basically implied that it was just a few people in Vauxhall. It really wasn't. What actually a friend of mine, we actually had a quite drunken row once near where I live, where he was saying it isn't this chemsex thing isn't an issue. And then about a year later, he'd been dating somebody who had to leave London because he had an addiction to crystal meth. A really nice, regular guy who tried this drug, become addicted to it, and then literally had to give up his life and go and live back with his parents.
Can I just say, if anybody's watching this and thinking, oh, chemsex doesn't apply to me, I would argue that there is a direct through line from chemsex to drinking too much, kind of dangerous sex, just general self-destructive behavior, and unhealthy relationships. And it's all part of the same thing, isn't it? I agree with you that chemsex is a big problem, but those of us it hasn't directly touched, I think some people can too easily dismiss it.
The great thing is that most people are not doing taking these hard drugs. Most people aren't. The vast majority of gay and bi men are not taking these drugs. It's just that too many of us are, and it's not about being oh, drugs and this and that and you shouldn't have sex. And it's just like in the last 6 months, there were 2 people I know that died because they had addiction problems. People in their kind of 30s who should still be here. So it's a significant problem. So I had a few people saying to me, and someone said to me, I think you're going to get people are having a go at you in the street when this book comes out. And then the book's come out, and I've had a couple of people saying, tweets saying they didn't like this or that, but like literally like 2 or 3, like I've had, I get emails and messages every week from around the world on Instagram or Twitter saying the book's changed my life. Or there's a really moving message I had quite early on from a young man who sent me a message saying, my mum and dad wanted to thank you because they think you've saved my life, because they were worried that I was going to die because I was drinking too much and I didn't know what the problem was. So it's a painful book, but just to get the conversation talking, because it's so interesting, the connection, isn't there, between your book and my book, that your book's about this guy that's traumatized through what he's grown up and being shamed and being told that you're not okay, and wasn't able to come out when he was younger. And that's kind of, my book is about the consequences of decades of us living that way and being told that, and how we how some of us have internalized that, because it's hard not to. It's hard not to when you're told, you're terrible. It's hard not to, on some level, start absorbing some of those messages.
Absolutely. And I've said to you before, not only did I read the issue of attitude you're talking about, the issues issue, as it was called.
That's how we became friends, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I got in touch and said it had a big impact on me. And not just this book, but my previous book, The Madonna of Bolton, actually, the fact that you opened up this conversation about gay shame absolutely fed into what I was writing and added a layer of emotional depth and understanding that when I was writing or rewriting with the first book and with The Madonna of Bolton and writing this book, if I hadn't been as aware of how being made to feel bad about yourself and being made to feel like you're a dirty, shameful secret that has to be hidden away can affect your sense of self and behaviour. If it weren't for that discussion starting, I couldn't have written those books, or certainly they wouldn't be half as good. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing now, isn't it, that I'd love to read some kind of general gay lifestyle articles from before that conversation opened up. And I wonder if there's a complete lack of awareness of it. I can't imagine not having that awareness now. Looking at gay culture and how we behave as a community, I can't imagine looking at it without having that colour the lens a bit.
Well, I think I think there was a real lack of awareness of it, and I still think there's a kind of lack of awareness of it today. I mean, I just saw an article that Attitude had published, an online article about, to be honest, I haven't read it, so maybe I'm judging it, but this article about why do some gay men go cottaging and cruising, and you touched upon that in your book. And it's very complex, in some ways some people still do it because they can, but also there's a kind of history of it and all the rest of it. But also I don't think you can take out of it the kind of even though some people might be offended by this, I'm not trying to offend people because I'm, I've had a busy sex life. I'm not saying, I'm a saint by any means.
We all, darling.
Haven't we all? Not making a judgment about it all, but I know that some of my sexual behavior has been driven by shame and anxiety and trying to keep a lid on difficult feelings. And I've met many men, there's a guy interviewed for Straight Jacket who talks about what I would say was a real addiction to having sex in public spaces, because he had felt that was kind of the only place that he was acceptable. And it's so complicated, isn't it? Because, like, of course, we always say there's so many happy LGBT people, so many people in great happy relationships, like your good self, but there's lots of us, and I have been one of these people as well, that's really struggled, because when you have that sense of not feeling very good about yourself, it can be hard to have a relationship with somebody else. So I think sometimes I think the mental health stuff is addressed a bit more, but I don't think there's a massive understanding of it still. I remember in 1996, just as I was about to start work at Attitude, I was about 23 or 24 or something, and they used to do this thing, ups and downers, what's in this week, in this month, and what's out.
We did it when I was there, still in
2016. It dragged on for years. I think they still do it, don't they? I remember they put in it something that they were saying was great in the upper section. And they were saying, "Oh, we've creamed our Dolce & Gabbana knickers." And I remember just thinking, this magazine's not for me if that's that kind of superficial view. You know what I mean? Like, just like, oh, I must go out and get my Dolce & Gabbana knickers, and I'm going to the Calvin Klein store, and I know that Attitude has been like that at times, and I tried to change that. Yeah, but it's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having nice posh knickers or whatever, but this idea that that's what defines, you know what I mean? That you're just a hyper consumer kind of brainless.
I don't have any Dolce & Gabbana knickers.
I wish I did.
But I have to say that's another thing we haven't talked about. Gay men and humour. Actually, I've been thinking about this when I've been promoting the new book, because people often pick up on the humour in my books and say, "Oh, it's really funny and blah blah blah." And I've noticed that humour is something gay men really understand. They understand the power of it. It can be a way of starting to please people, and when we're rejected and ostracised from social groups, trying to find our place in them. And I've noticed that sometimes what we have done on the downside is when there are uncomfortable, emotionally overwrought conversations or uncomfortable truths that we don't want to face, we can undercut them with a bit of humour. And for me, it's finding the balance between getting what's good out of humour. And I love making people laugh. I love putting the humour in my books. But what you don't want, and you know, we can't actually, I know what you're saying about what your point about the Dolce & Gabbana knickers joke isn't the point that it was a joke. It's the point that that's what being gay means, having Dolce & Gabbana knickers. And I would argue that humor for many gay men is a big part of their identity and experience, but also it is something we understand, but we do have to be careful that, you know, we can't be worthy all the time, but we do have to be careful that it doesn't undermine more important things that we need to confront and talk about.
I agree. Do it. I agree. Yes. I agree. Yeah, of course. I mean, I used to do stand-up comedy, and I mean, that's another whole other discussion, isn't it? Now that, like, a lot of comedians would say now that because of this kind of woke culture or whatever, that it's actually hard to do comedy. I'm hopefully going to go and do some more stand-up, and I've been watching some of it during lockdown, and I have to say, it does feel quite muted. That it's not about, I'm not saying, oh, they should be able to go and say homophobic, racist things. I don't mean that at all, but it just feels like the comedians now so self-conscious about like, you know, of what they say, because any statement you know, about anything can be seen to be offensive or
well, I've noticed, particularly with online social media culture, different factions of the wider LGBT family and community, LGBTQIA, I'm talking about all, you know, actually if somebody means well, but maybe is just a bit clumsy in their expression of a point, other people can pounce on them. And there's been a few examples of, not just within our community, when a well-meaning ally has said something that's just maybe a bit insensitive, but the you know, the will and the intention is sound, and we've turned on them. And I think sometimes, you know, I'm not always sure that's the right way to do it. I think it can sometimes put people off, and it's not fair to them, actually. You know, we've needed to get, one of the things I celebrate in the book is, you know, when I'm talking about how much better things are now than what they used to be 50 years ago when my character Albert had this relationship. One of the things I celebrate is the role that allies have played. We could not have done this on our own. We just couldn't.
Yeah.
And I don't think people should be frightened of saying, I love gays, in case it's maybe slightly...
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. It's like sometimes when people say things like, oh, I love my gay friends, and people can roll their eyes. I mean, I get that, and I've probably done that myself, but it's like, I'd much rather people saying they love their gay friends than they don't like their gay friends.
Yeah.
And also we give people, we give a free pass to, I remember some of the things, there's a clip of Britney Spears you can see online saying, gays are great, they're somewhat like girls, you know, like really, but we don't attack her because we love her. So we can be very hypocritical about it.
But then when somebody, I can't remember whether it was Ollie Murs or somebody, said, I'm 20% gay, or you get some of these female stars who, or they used to say, I'm a gay man trapped in a woman's body. And yeah, you know what, when you break down those sentiments, they can be a bit offensive. I get that. But
we take it seriously. It's not meant in a serious way. It's just
not, is it? And it's just
meant
like
an affectionate, supportive way, ideally, you know.
And what an improvement to the kind of things they used to say to us at school. You dead, queer, backs against the wall.
Yeah.
We both said that at the same time.
No, I think, I mean, I think something like, I noticed that for you know, Pride Month's just begun, and I noticed that I saw a few people kind of criticizing big companies that have pride flags in their windows and things like that. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, which we won't get into now because we'll be here all day. It's a whole other, you know, hour-long discussion. But you kind of think, well, be careful what you wish for, because these are companies, you know, saying, you know, sending out messages into the community of support to LGBT people. So I'd be careful about saying, don't you do that? Don't you support us? You know, and I understand people's frustrations when they're not giving money to you know, LGBT charities, but it's complex and sensitive. Also, I'd say there's nothing else in the country. I mean, is there any other thing where every year for a month, loads of businesses and companies and shops start expressing their support for a group. I mean, sometimes I think I just don't understand how it's kind of evolved, and
No,
I worry sometimes. Is there an issue of it being a little bit too much? Is it gonna piss people off and drive
well,
them the
look,
other way? I don't know.
I mean, if you think about it, Toddy, we remember when we were growing up, people were routinely fired from their jobs when if their sexuality ever came out. And I'm sure there's people watching this
Who
who
would
are
be
older
fired
than us.
just because you were gay? Yeah, that's perfectly legal to do that.
Oh
Yeah.
no, oh no, people that happened to. And I would love to know how they feel, but I would imagine that if a company wants to visibly celebrate the contribution their LGBT employees are making, most older gay men, I imagine, I can't speak on their behalf, but would welcome that.
Well, you'd give your right arm, wouldn't you, if you were someone who'd been fired or kicked out of your job or whatever, to see that change. And
Yeah.
I think that's on the whole, yes, there may be problems with it, but it's a positive thing as opposed to a negative. Just changing tack slightly. How do you feel about being a slightly older gay man now? It's interesting that I say slightly older because I don't. I mean, we're kind of, well, I guess we're both middle aged, aren't we? But
Yeah, well,
there's this kind of like thing about being older, isn't there? As if it's like even earlier on when I said something like, "Oh, I'm the young one," it's like there's a stigma, isn't there, about age? And when you get to a certain point, maybe into your 40s, you start to feel it more.
to be honest, Toddy, when I mean, yeah, there were certain points in my life when I resisted the aging process. I realized a while ago that what what I loved about me, if we're going to talk about, getting away from gay shame and celebrating who we are, what I loved about me, it was nothing to do with what I look like. That's not what makes me special or even who I am. It's to do with my spirit and my intelligence and what I've got to say. And actually, those things get better with age. And frankly, I'm sure physically it's going to be downhill from here. But I don't think who I am is going to be compromised by that. I mean, we all there were times that I went to the gym too much and I made a real effort and, desperately pulled out every stop possible to hold myself up to the right side of average. But that's not what that's not what, I mean, the way I look is like so kind of an irrelevance to anything in my life or anything I've done that I'm proud of. I don't know. So I kind of feel, I feel much more relaxed about it now. And actually, the fact that the climate is changing now, maybe it's just because we're surrounded by older gay men. But I'm very happy to be older, to have gained more of a sense of who I am and what I want out of life, to be in a better position to achieve it. How about you?
Oh, I love that. I've never heard you say that before. I love that. I mean, it's true, isn't it? It's like we are that's maybe the problem. It's not just a gay thing. I suppose we touched upon this earlier on, but I do think it is particularly bad within gay culture that it's so visual. And I think it must be very difficult to be a young person now where, when we were younger, you had the mirror going out of the house, coming back into the house. Sometimes some people would spend more time in front of it than others. Or you had your camera that you had on special occasions or holidays or Christmas that you'd then send off and you get the pictures back, 2 weeks later. Whereas now it's a constant, how do I look? How do I look? The visual, and on Instagram and people posting pictures. So it must be very difficult to be a young person growing up in that environment. I'm glad I didn't have that because I think it would have been really difficult. There's definitely plus points about being older and calming down and engaging with older people. I've got some really good relationships with some men who happen to be gay men in their 70s, which I really cherish. I really enjoy hearing their perspective on not just gay stuff, but just on life and just being hearing about them and their experience and their life and what they've done. So there's loads of positives.
Absolutely. I always say that we're the only minority community in this country, well, anywhere, that doesn't have parents from the same minority by default. Usually if you're Black or Indian, at least one parent will be the same, or Jewish. We don't have that. And I think in the way that you absorb a message from your parents about how men behave, how people behave in a marriage or a relationship, how, who we are and what we do, we don't get that. And I think, that's part of the motivation for me writing this book again, because my character did not have a sense of who he was. He couldn't absorb that from anywhere, not just from the lack of parents from the same minority, but role models in the media and this, that, and the other. And actually, I think you take for granted like behaviour that I look at all my nephews and how they pick up what it means to be a man from their dads, and just kind of like aping traditional male behaviour and activities. And I didn't know how to be gay because I didn't have any older men in my life. And the older men I have now, exactly as you say, I really cherish, and their contribution to me and my life is massively important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hurrah. It's
And
all good.
it's all good. And on that note, we're being told to wrap up.
Oh, I've enjoyed this. Basically like a regular Sunday night natter, isn't it? Between the two of us.
Yes. So I'll just say to the camera, thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and enjoy the rest of Silver Pride.
Thanks for having us.